The Tower of Joy was quiet, except for Lyanna's shallow breathing. Her skin was pale, soaked in sweat, and her voice barely a whisper. She had just given birth to a baby boy, dark hair like his father, Rhaegar Targaryen, and strong lungs that cried out, as if already angry at the world he was born into. Ned Stark knelt beside his sister, holding her hand. "You're going to be fine," he whispered, lying as gently as he could. Lyanna knew better. She shook her head, eyes filled with both pain and fear. "You have to protect him, Ned," she said. "If Robert finds out, he'll kill him. He hates all Targaryens, even innocent ones." Ned looked at the child. His heart was torn. This baby, his sister's child, was the blood of the man who had nearly destroyed the realm. But he was also just a newborn, helpless, innocent, and tied by blood to Ned's own family. He could not let him die. "I will raise him as my own," Ned said, the weight of the promise already burning in his chest. But Lyanna gripped his hand tighter, shaking her head again. "No," she said, her voice clearer this time. "Don't claim him as yours, that lie. It will hurt you, your wife, your children. Don't hide him as your bastard, Ned. Take me with you. Say I survived. Say the child is mine. And yours." Ned pulled back in shock. "Lyanna, people will whisper." "Let them," she cut in, her tone sharp for the first time. "Let them say what they want. You'll be called dishonorable, but people already whisper about Targaryens and their ways. No one will question if we say the child is ours. You're a Stark. I'm a Stark. That's enough." The silence in the tower grew heavier. Ned looked at the child again. Would it be better to let the world believe he fathered his own nephew than to risk Robert's wrath? Could he let Lyanna live with that shame? But he remembered the way Robert talked about Rhaegar, full of hate, full of rage. If he ever found out that Rhaegar had a son, even if the boy was innocent, Robert would not stop until he had the child's head on a spike. "I'll do it," Ned finally said, his voice heavy. "We'll leave tonight." At Winterfell, whispers began almost immediately. Ned Stark had returned with his sister, alive but changed, pale, quiet, and carrying a child that clearly wasn't hers by any northern lord. Maester Luwin had delivered the child again to hide the truth, and the castle folk were told only what they needed to know, that Lyanna had fallen pregnant during her captivity, and that Ned had brought her home out of honor. Catelyn Stark stood at the gates when they arrived, her face unreadable. She looked at Lyanna holding the baby boy, and then at Ned, who seemed 10 years older than the last time she had seen him. Later that night, in private, Catelyn asked the question he had been dreading. "Is it yours?" Ned hesitated for a second too long. "Yes," he lied. Catelyn nodded slowly, and though she said nothing more, a wall went up between them that would never fully come down. She agreed to raise the boy in the castle, but never as her own. The child, named Jon Snow, would be a Stark, but not truly part of her heart. Lyanna, weak from birth but alive, took to mothering the child with fierce love. She rarely left her chambers in the early years, always holding Jon close. To the world, she was a woman ruined by war and now raising her shame in silence. But to Jon, she was simply Mama. Years passed and whispers grew colder. Lords who had once honored the Starks looked at Lyanna with suspicion and quiet judgment. Ned bore the shame in silence, never correcting the lie. Even when Catelyn's jealousy deepened, even when Robb and Sansa began asking questions about why Aunt Lyanna never left the Tower Wing, Ned stayed quiet, because the truth was too dangerous, and the lie was the only way to keep Jon alive. Jon Snow grew up surrounded by snow-covered walls and cold glances. He didn't understand why Lady Catelyn never smiled at him, or why the other lords' sons whispered when he walked past. He didn't understand why people called him Snow and not Stark. All he knew was that his mother, Aunt Lyanna to most, but Mama to him, loved him more fiercely than anyone else in the world. But even as a child, Jon felt it. The weight of being unwanted. Winterfell was a home carved from stone and honor, but there was little warmth for him outside his mother's arms. Robb Stark was his closest friend, almost like a brother. But even Robb didn't understand why their father was always so serious around Jon, or why Lady Stark would go silent when Jon entered a room. Jon asked his mother once, "Why doesn't Lady Catelyn like me?" Lyanna held him tight, brushing back his black curls. "Because I remind her of something she wishes she could forget," she said softly. Jon tilted his head. "Like what?" Lyanna didn't answer. She just pulled him closer. As Jon got older, the questions became heavier. He noticed how the guards didn't bow to him like they did to the Stark children. He noticed how, during feasts, he sat at the edge of the table, always a little apart. When a visiting lord asked him who his father was, Jon answered, "Lord Eddard Stark." The man raised an eyebrow and smirked. "And your mother?" he asked. Jon proudly said, "Lady Lyanna." The hall had gone quiet. That night, Jon asked Ned, "Am I really your son?" Ned looked at him with tired eyes, as if he'd been waiting for this day forever. "You are my blood," he said firmly. "And you are loved, but not by your wife." Ned sighed. "Some truths, Jon, are dangerous, and the more people know them, the more dangerous they become. Promise me something, don't chase the past. Live forward." Jon didn't understand. He was too young to know what kind of truth could kill him, but someone else was. Beginning to remember. Someone who had once loved. Lyanna Stark with a passion that turned to poison. King Robert Baratheon. When Robert visited Winterfell years later, his eyes landed on Jon almost instantly. The boy had Stark features, but something else too. A hint of nobility, a sharpness in his cheekbones, something that pulled at Robert's memories. He narrowed his eyes. "That boy," Robert said to Ned as they walked through the Godswood. "The one with Lyanna's look." "He's hers?" Ned nodded. "She bore him after her escape from the tower. I claimed him to protect her name," Robert grunted. "And the father?" Ned didn't flinch. "A southern lord." "Long dead." Robert didn't believe him, but he also didn't press further. He didn't want to fight Ned, the only man he still trusted. Not yet, but that seed of suspicion was planted. Later that night, Robert visited Lyanna's chambers unannounced. She was sitting by the fire, brushing Jon's hair. The boy had fallen asleep in her lap. She looked up, startled. "Robert." His eyes softened for a second, seeing her alive, older but still hauntingly beautiful. "You're still as stubborn as ever," he said. "Raising the boy here, naming him yours. Do you think I don't see his face and remember Rhaegar's?" Her eyes flashed. "He is not Rhaegar, he is mine. And he is innocent." Robert stepped closer. "You chose him over me. I chose my son," she said sharply. "You would have killed him, Robert." "You still might. I would never hurt you," he said, "but you would have spilled his blood without blinking." Robert stared at her, then turned and walked out. The next morning, he left Winterfell earlier than planned. Ned knew something had changed. Jon continued growing up, caught between two worlds, never fully a Stark, never truly a Snow. He watched Sansa learn courtly manners, hurry a train with a blade, and Bran climb walls like a wildcat. He stayed on the edges, always nearby, never central. He was proud of his mother, but confused by the shame others placed on her. He wanted to ask her more, about the war, about Rhaegar, about why he couldn't use the Stark name, but he saw the pain behind her eyes every time the past came up. So he stayed quiet. For her, but Lyanna Stark was growing tired. The burden of lies, of whispered shame, of living under Catelyn's cold stare had aged her. She didn't speak at court. She didn't walk the castle halls. She lived for Jon, and feared for him, because if the truth ever slipped out, if Robert ever guessed, Winterfell would burn, and Jon Snow, her son, would die before ever knowing who he truly was. Jon stood in the courtyard, sword in hand, sweat rolling down his brow as he practiced with Robb under Ser Roderick's watchful eye. Their wooden swords clashed again and again, but Jon moved quicker, sharper, always with a sense of needing to prove something, even if he didn't know what. Catelyn watched from a window high above, arms folded tight. Her son Robb was strong, proud, everything a Stark heir should be. But that other boy, the one who called her husband father and her sister-in-law mother, he was something else, too graceful, too focused. She hated how much like a prince he looked, too much of Lyanna in him, she muttered to herself. And someone else too. That night, as Jon sat by the fire with Arya, showing her how to balance a dagger, Lady Stark entered the room and went still. "Bedtime. Arya," she said curtly, "but mother—" "Now." Arya left with a sigh, clutching the dagger like a prize. Catelyn walked up to Jon. He stood out of respect, eyes wary. She had never raised a hand to him, never shouted, but her silence cut deeper. "You remind me of someone," she said, voice low. Jon tilted his head. "Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. Her fingers trembled and Jon flinched. It was the first time she had touched him in years. "I see it more every day. Your face, it's not Eddard's, not fully. You carry something else, something dangerous. I don't understand." "No," she whispered, stepping back. "But one day you will." She left him standing there, heart pounding, unsure why her voice had sounded so much like a warning. That winter, Maester Luwin received a raven from King's Landing. Robert Baratheon's tone was sharp, though cloaked in politeness. He requested updates on Lady Lyanna's health and a kind word about the boy she was raising. Ned read the message 3 times. Robert hadn't forgotten. That evening, he climbed the tower steps to Lyanna's chambers. She was seated by the fire, her hands busy with needlework. Jon sat beside her, asleep with a book on his chest. "He remembers," Ned said. Lyanna didn't look up. "He always would. He's asking questions now. About Jon, about you." She finally met his eyes. "Then we must be ready." Ned stepped closer. "Ready to do what?" "To tell Jon the truth. Or at least, prepare him for it." "No," Ned said firmly. "Not yet. You've asked him to live under a lie, Ned. How long before that lie eats him alive? How long before he stops trusting us?" Ned said nothing. The silence spoke for him, but someone else had begun asking questions too. Little Bran, always climbing, had stumbled onto a conversation he didn't fully understand. One night, while climbing across the castle wall near the rookery, he paused at a window, the small solar where Maester Luwin often met with Lord Stark. He heard voices, low, tense. "His blood is dangerous," came Maester Luwin's whisper. "If Robert suspects anything more, he could demand proof." "I won't give him any," Ned replied. "Jon is under my protection, but the boy's resemblance, the way he carries himself, the more he grows, the more the lie unravels. He is Lyanna's son." "That's all the world needs to know, is it?" Luwin asked. "Or is that what you need to believe?" Bran slipped and nearly fell, heart thudding. He scrambled away before he was caught. That night, as Robb and Jon laughed over supper, Bran stared at Jon with new eyes. Who was he, really? Down in the village, another threat stirred. Merchant woman from the south, olive-skinned and sharp-eyed, had begun spreading rumors in Wintertown. She claimed she once served at the Tower of Joy, claimed she saw a silver-haired prince with a Stark girl, claimed a baby was born there, with the blood of the dragon and the wolf. The rumors reached the ears of a wandering sellsword named Boromund, who had once fought under Robert's banner. Drunk and bitter, he listened with interest. "Targaryen blood," he slurred. "In the north." The merchant woman nodded. "Hidden, protected. If you find him, they say he'll be worth gold to the crown." Bormund smiled. "Gold or a pardon, either works for me." He rode for Winterfell the next day. Inside the castle walls, Jon stood in the crypts, staring at the statue of Lyanna. She had grown weaker over the years, her health slowly fading like the winter sun. He often found her in the crypts, whispering to the stone effigy as if seeking forgiveness. This time, she wasn't there. Just silence, but Jon felt something stir inside him. An emptiness, a question that had no shape but weighed heavily in his chest. "Who am I?" he whispered to the stone. Behind him, footsteps. It was Arya. "You look like her," she said. "Everyone says so." Jon didn't turn around. "Do you think she regrets me?" Arya blinked. "No, but I think everyone else does." Jon smiled sadly. "That's what I'm afraid of." The shadow of the past had finally begun to reach for Jon Snow. Lies were thinning. Old enemies were moving. And the boy, raised in silence, was walking blindly into the storm his blood had borne. The truth was coming, and Winterfell would never be the same. The snow came down heavier that morning. Thick flakes fell like ash over Winterfell, coating the yard, the rooftops, the trees. A quiet kind of dread settled over the castle, the kind that seeps in before a storm, when the wind feels wrong and the air carries secrets. Jon was training again, alone this time, swinging his sword against a dummy with quiet fury. He didn't know why he was angry. Maybe it was the look Bran gave him lately, like he knew something. Maybe it was the way Lady Stark's silence had turned sharper, colder. Or maybe it was the way his mother Lyanna coughed more than usual now and covered it with a smile. But the real reason, he felt it in his bones. Something was coming. He was still in the yard when the gates of Winterfell opened. A lone rider, wrapped in black and silver, entered on horseback, followed by 3 men in southern armor. Sir Roderick met them at the gate with a frown. "Who rides into the north unannounced?" he asked. The rider removed his hood. "I am Sir Boromund Trant," he said, "Knight of the Crownlands. I come with questions and royal interest." Ned Stark arrived moments later, flanked by his bannermen. Bormund's eyes scanned the courtyard and paused when they saw Jon. "That boy," he said softly. "He yours, Lord Stark?" Ned didn't answer. "I've heard whispers," Bormund continued, "about a child born of dragon's blood, hidden in the north. I'm here to confirm if such a thing exists." "You'll find nothing but northern snows here," Ned replied coldly. "And if you dig too deep, the cold will bite." But Bormund wasn't just a drunk sellsword anymore. He held a letter with the king's seal, Robert's own hand, requesting verification of rumors surrounding Lyanna and her child. Robert hadn't sent men to arrest or accuse. He had sent them to see, and if what they saw matched the ghost that haunted the king's dreams, blood would follow. Jon watched from the shadows, heart pounding. He didn't understand all the words, but he knew one thing, that man had looked at him the same way everyone else had started to lately, like he didn't belong. That night, Jon crept into his mother's chambers. Lyanna was by the fire, wrapped in furs, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly as she held a cup of tea. "They're here for me, aren't they?" Jon asked. Lyanna's eyes filled with tears. "They're here for what you are," she whispered. "What am I?" She didn't answer, so he asked again, and this time she broke. "You are not my shame, Jon," she said, standing slowly. "You are my son." "And your father was not a dishonorable man." He stepped back, confused. "You are not a bastard," she said softly. "You are the son of Rhaegar Targaryen." "And me," the world seemed to tilt. Jon shook his head. "No, that's not. That can't." "I married him," she whispered. "We loved each other. It wasn't kidnapping. It wasn't rape. It was a secret that cost thousands of lives." Jon staggered, trying to breathe. "You're not Jon Snow," she said. "You are Jaehaerys Targaryen, trueborn, of fire and ice." The next day, Jon didn't come down for training. Arya found him sitting alone on the edge of the Godswood Pond, staring into the frozen water like it might answer him. She sat beside him and said nothing for a while. Finally, he spoke. "If you found out everything you believed about yourself was a lie, what would you do?" Arya frowned. "Cut whoever lied to me," she said. Jon smiled a little. Then it faded. "I'm not who I thought I was. You're still my brother." "Am I?" Arya nodded. "Blood doesn't make brothers. Loyalty does." But across the castle, Sir Bormund wasn't waiting for permission anymore. He had seen enough. That boy wasn't just some bastard. He was Rhaegar's son, the image of a prince long dead. He rode out of Winterfell that evening, heading south to deliver his report to King Robert. But he didn't make it far. He was found the next morning, dead in the snow, his throat slit, his horse gone. The body was discovered by rangers returning from the wall. And Ned Stark heard the news with a grim face. He knew it wasn't bandits. Someone had silenced the truth, and it wasn't his doing. That night, Ned visited Lyanna. Her illness had worsened. She coughed blood now, her skin like paper. "You told him," he said. "He deserved the truth." Ned sat beside her, his voice low. "If Robert finds out, he'll come here with fire." Lyanna smiled weakly. "Then let him. We've lived under the shadow of a lie for too long." Ned gripped her hand. "He'll kill him." "Then don't let him," she whispered. "Promise me, Ned." Not again. He bowed his head. I swear it. On my name, on my honor, on the old gods and the new. Far beneath Winterfell, in the crypts, Jon stood alone before the tomb of his grandfather Rickard Stark. He placed a hand on the cold stone. I am not Jon Snow, he said quietly, but I will be. And somewhere deep in the blood of the dragon and the wolf, something old and powerful began to stir. The royal procession rolled through the gates of Winterfell, beneath a sky heavy with snow. The banners of House Baratheon and Lannister flapped in the cold wind, carried by soldiers whose eyes were sharp, scanning every inch of the castle. The small folk gathered along the walls fell silent as the king passed, their breath misting in the air like ghosts. King Robert Baratheon had grown fat, but power still clung to him like a shroud. His black beard was streaked with grey now, his armor tight over his swollen belly. But his eyes were full of fire. He did not smile. Beside him rode Queen Cersei, her expression carved from ice, golden hair tucked neatly into her furs. And beside her rode Jaime Lannister, still smug, still dangerous, hand never far from his sword. A wall of Lannister guards followed, and behind them, the royal entourage. Ned waited in the courtyard with his children and his bannermen. Warden of the North, Robert said as he dismounted. My king, Ned replied. The men embraced, but it was a hollow thing. Two ghosts pretending they were still friends. Robert's eyes moved past Ned almost immediately. They landed on Jon Snow. Robert stared, breath caught in his throat. The boy had Lyanna's eyes, stark in every way, and yet not. Cersei followed his gaze. She raised a single eyebrow. And who is this? Robert asked, voice too calm. My nephew, Ned answered. Jon Snow, son of Lyanna. Robert looked like he'd been punched. You kept him. I protected him from me, Robert hissed, stepping closer. You think I'd harm her child? You swore you'd kill every Targaryen, Ned said coldly. You swore until your throat was dry. Robert turned to Jon. And what have they told you, boy? Jon held his ground. That my mother loved me. That she died to keep me safe. Robert's jaw clenched. Did they also tell you your father was the man who raped and stole her? He married her, Jon said. They loved each other. A hush fell over the courtyard. Even Cersei blinked at that. Robert's face turned red. Lies. Jon didn't flinch. The truth. Ned stepped between them. This isn't a conversation for the yard. No, Robert growled. This is a reckoning. That night, Winterfell's great hall was heavy with tension. The feast was prepared, but few ate. The king sat at the high table, drinking deeply, eyes locked on Jon. The boy sat beside Robb, hands tight on his knees. Arya glared at anyone who dared look his way. Sansa whispered behind her cup with Septa Mordain. Bran watched everyone, saying nothing. Catelyn had not attended. Cersei broke the silence. You've raised him well. For a boy of uncertain birth, Jon looked up. Better than some born in palaces. Jaime let out a quiet laugh. Robert slammed his goblet down. Enough! The room froze. You've lied to me, Ned, all these years. You made me believe she was stolen, ruined. You let me slaughter Rhaegar. You let me believe she died hating him. She died protecting their son, Ned said. Because she knew the truth would get him killed. Robert looked at Jon, hatred and grief battling behind his eyes. He's not just her son, he said. He's the heir. Whispers broke out around the hall. He has the blood, Robert continued. The dragon's blood, the line of kings, Ned stood. He never asked for a crown, but it's his by right, Robert roared. You think the lords of Westeros won't rally behind a true-born Targaryen once they learn? They won't, Ned said firmly. Because they'll never know. Cersei's smile was thin and cruel. Too late for that, Lord Stark. Robert turned to her, confused. What have you done? Cersei leaned back in her chair. You weren't the only one who sent spies. The moment you told me we were riding north, I had letters sent. The truth is already traveling south. By now Varys has it. So does Renly, maybe even Dorne. Robert stared at her, stunned. You married a lion, she said coldly. Not a fool. Later that night, Jon stood in the Godswood, hands shaking. Robb found him there. They'll kill me, Jon said. They'll try, Robb replied. But they'll have to go through me first. Jon looked at him. Why? Robb placed a hand on his shoulder. Because you're my brother. Always have been. Targaryen or not, Jon turned away. They're going to destroy everything. Winterfell, father, all of it. Then don't let them. Jon looked at him. You want to know what a true king does? Robb asked. He protects his people, even if he has to burn down the world to do it. In the tower where Lyanna once lived, Ned Stark sat alone by the window. He saw fire coming. He always knew it would. And in the darkness below, Jon stood under the old gods, breathing deep, feeling something ancient rise in his blood, not just fire, not just ice, but the storm that would come when both collided. Winterfell never slept again after that night. The truth had cracked the walls of silence, and now every hall whispered Jon's name, but not as Snow, as Targaryen, as heir, as threat. The courtiers avoided him now. The servants bowed too deeply. The guards stiffened when he passed. He no longer belonged to the shadows. He had become a storm standing in the open, and everyone feared what might come next. Ned kept close watch. Every letter was intercepted, every raven examined, every conversation controlled. But even he couldn't stop the tide. Varys now knew, Littlefinger surely knew, and Robert. He was unraveling. King Robert had not left his chambers for 2 days. He drank endlessly, shouted at shadows, smashed goblets against the walls. Lyanna's memory had returned to haunt him, not as a pure maiden stolen from his arms, but as a mother who had chosen another, a traitor to the dream he'd built his war upon. She chose him, he growled into his wine. She let me burn half the realm for a lie. Jaime Lannister stood by the window, polishing his sword. Well, you've built a fine kingdom on that lie. Why let a boy ruin it? Robert glared at him. He's not just a boy. He's his boy. And what of it? Jaime shrugged. He's quiet, loyal, raised by Starks. Not exactly a dragon flying over King's Landing, Robert grunted. Not yet. Jaime narrowed his eyes. So what now? Murder him? Like the babes in King's Landing? The silence that followed was sharp and deadly. Cersei entered moments later, smirking. You didn't mind when it was Aelia's children. Robert's face darkened. This is different. No, Robert, this is the same. Targaryens don't fade. They wait, they survive. And then one day they return, burn the boy, or be ready to fight him. That same night, Ned sat with Jon in the godswood beneath the heart tree. Red leaves fluttered like blood in the snow. I should have told you sooner, Ned said. Jon didn't respond. Ned continued, voice heavy with guilt. I thought I could protect you from the world by hiding you from it. But the world doesn't forget its kings, or its enemies. Jon looked up at him. You told me to be a Stark. Now they want me to be a Targaryen. You don't have to be either, Ned said. You only have to be yourself. But what if being myself starts a war? Ned's expression hardened. Then may the gods forgive us all. Because the war has already begun. And indeed, it had. That same night, while Winterfell slept, the betrayal came. One of the Lannister guards, dressed in black, face masked, slipped past the outer guards and made his way to the northern wing. He moved quickly, silently, blade glinting under moonlight, his target Jon Snow, but as he pushed open the door he was met not by a sleeping boy, but Arya. The blade never touched her. Nymeria, her wolf, lunged first, ripping the man's arm open before he could scream. Jon, awakened by the chaos, tackled the assassin. Driving his dagger into his throat, blood soaked the floor. The noise drew half the castle. By dawn, the truth was clear. The assassin bore the sigil of House Lannister beneath his armor, and the king had known nothing of the plot, or so he claimed. Ned confronted Robert before the sun rose. You brought lions into my home, he growled, slamming the blood-stained cloak onto the table. And they tried to kill my son, your nephew, Robert said bitterly. He is my blood, Ned roared. Robert rose to his feet. He's a Targaryen. He's a boy, Ned shouted back. Raised here, under my roof. He's more Stark than dragon. Robert stared at him. I should have burned the truth the moment I saw it. You burn this boy, Ned said coldly, and you'll burn the north with him. Silence. Then Robert sat, old and tired. "I never wanted this. You made this," Ned said. "You made this when you built a crown on revenge, when you killed children and called it peace, when you chose hatred over truth." Robert said nothing. Later that evening, Jon stood on the walls of Winterfell, staring into the frozen night. Robb joined him. "They say you killed a Lannister." "I did." "Good," Jon smirked. "I thought you were supposed to be the honorable one." Robb shrugged. "Not tonight." A raven flew overhead, vanishing into the trees. Jon didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the horizon. "Do you think war's coming?" Robb asked. Jon didn't answer for a long time. Then, "I don't think it ever left." Below them, in the shadows of the trees, a rider waited, a black cloak, pale face, and golden eyes that flickered in the moonlight. He had come from beyond the wall, not for the crown, not for Jon, but for what Jon's blood had awakened. Winterfell no longer felt like home. Its walls had protected Jon for years, raised him in stone and snow, but now they felt tight, like a cage holding something too large to be contained. His secret had burst free like wildfire, and the heat of it burned through every corridor. The assassination attempt had been a spark. Now the fire was coming. The morning after the attack, ravens arrived from all corners of the realm. Letters came from Riverrun, from the Vale, from Dragonstone, from Dorne, each one filled with speculation, accusation, or veiled threats. One message chilled Ned to the bone. If the boy is who they say, then the realm must choose. The lion, the stag, or the dragon reborn. Lord Baelish even across the narrow sea, whispers had begun. Targaryen loyalists stirred in the shadows of Essos. Gold cloaks moved strangely in King's Landing. The faith sent word that a king born of both fire and honor was a sign of prophecy. Jon had become more than a bastard. He had become a question the whole realm was being forced to answer. King Robert summoned Jon to the Great Hall. The room was full. Every northern lord, every Lannister knight, every Stark child seated in grim silence. Jon entered alone. His cloak was black, his hair tied back, Longclaw at his hip, a sword that had once belonged to House Mormont, now reborn in his hands. He knelt before the king. Robert looked at him, hard, searching. "You look like her," he said finally. "And like him." "I'm neither," Jon replied. "You carry the blood of my enemy. Do you deny it?" "No." "You are the son of the man I killed." Jon raised his eyes. "And the woman you loved." Robert flinched. The hall murmured. "You could claim the throne," Robert said. "You could rally the South, bring fire and sword against me. Do you want the crown?" Jon stood. "I want the truth. I want peace. I want to be free, and if I can't give you that, then I'll take it." A long silence followed, and then Robert did something no one expected. He laughed bitterly, then sat down. "The realm will never forgive this," he said. "But I'm tired of fighting ghosts." Later, in Ned's chambers, Robert spoke plainly. "I can't protect him from Cersei, or from the lords who fear dragons. The only way this ends is with a war, or with him gone." Ned looked up sharply. "Gone? Send him to the wall. Let him vanish beyond it. Let him die a Stark, not a Targaryen." Ned's face turned to stone. "You would exile the son of the woman you claimed to love?" Robert stood. "I would do what kings must. I learned that when I crushed a baby's skull during my rebellion. Jon heard the decision that same night. He stood by his father, no, his uncle, and listened as the man who'd nearly killed his family offered him one last kindness. "Take the black," Robert said. "Serve the realm. Die forgotten, or live long enough to see them call you king and traitor." Jon said nothing, but that night he didn't sleep. He climbed to the top of Winterfell's tower, the one where his mother once whispered her dying wish. He stared out across the snow-covered north, and he made a choice. At dawn, Winterfell's gates opened. Jon Snow rode out, black cloak billowing behind him, but he wasn't headed for the wall. He rode north, but beyond the wall, into the haunted forest, into the land of the forgotten and the cursed, into the cold, because something was calling him there. Not politics, not crowns, but a power older than dragons, older than kings. 2 nights later, the black-cloaked rider who had watched from the trees finally revealed himself. He stepped from the shadows with eyes like pale ice and a face like carved bone. "Who are you?" Jon asked. The man removed his hood. "I am your uncle," he said. "Benjen Stark, and I have waited for you." Jon stepped back. "You're dead." "Not quite," Benjen said. "I was saved by the magic of the children. The old gods preserved me." "For this? For what?" Benjen stepped forward. "For the return of the true heir. For the war that's coming, not of kings and crowns, but of life and death," Jon frowned. "The White Walkers?" Benjen nodded. "The wall is not just stone. It is magic. But it is failing, and you are both fire and ice. You are what they fear." Jon stared at the distant mountains. "Then I need to become what I was born to be." Benjen looked at him with something like pride. "You're not the boy who served in the yard anymore. You are the prince that was promised." "No," Jon said, his voice low. "I'm not a prince. I'm their reckoning, back at Winterfell. Ravens flew in every direction, whispers of a boy who vanished into the far north, of a prince born of love, raised in silence, of a Targaryen who turned his back on the throne, and somewhere, deep beneath the wall, something ancient stirred, not because it feared dragons, but because it feared the one dragon who carried the north in his heart, the boy who should have died, the boy who became the storm. Jon Snow, the bastard king, the fire they couldn't burn, the wolf they couldn't chain.